October 13th, 1806. French troops are tearing through the city of Jena, Germany, looting houses and setting fires in the wake of a massive military coup. Watching from his window is a philosopher named Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. He had just finished the manuscript for his first major book, stuffing the pages into his coat to keep them safe. But looking out at the chaos, he didn't see random violence. He saw Napoleon Bonaparte riding a horse. Hegel wrote to a friend that he had just seen a world soul, a single individual reaching out and mastering the globe. At the time, the prevailing philosophical consensus, led by Immanuel Kant, argued that human reason had strict limits, that we could never grasp reality exactly as it is. Hegel thought that was incoherent. If you can identify a limit, you've already crossed it. To Hegel, reason can grasp reality, and if you look closely at the bloody, chaotic sequence of human history, it is actually a highly rational process moving in a specific direction. This document is the title page of the Code Napoleon. It abolished feudal privileges and established equality before the law across Europe. To Hegel, ruthless conquerors like Napoleon didn't need to intentionally care about freedom. History simply used their ambition as a vehicle to smash outdated medieval estates so modern states could be built in the wreckage. Hegel believed this forward momentum was powered by a very specific engine. He called it the dialectic. The dialectic is the idea that every concept, every institution, and every societal arrangement carries a hidden tension inside of it. Over time, that tension builds up until the structure can no longer contain it, eventually forcing the system to collapse into its exact opposite. This bust shows the philosopher Socrates. Ancient Greek civic life relied heavily on citizens accepting the customs of their community without question, but Socrates taught Athenians to examine their own beliefs and reflect on them as individuals. He introduced a principle of individual reflection that the rigid unity of the community completely failed to absorb. Every historical stage buckles under the weight of whatever ideas or people it tries to exclude. In Hegel's framework, no society is permanent, but a collapse does not mean we start over from scratch. When a system breaks down, the next stage absorbs the achievements of the previous era while correcting its failures. Hegel used the German word Aufhebung to describe this. The process simultaneously cancels, preserves, and elevates. When the Roman Empire emerged, it kept the old Greek idea of the citizen who held rights, but it elevated that concept by giving individuals a legal identity that existed independently of any single city-state. This illustration shows Martin Luther burning the papal bull during the Reformation. For Hegel, this era helped establish the modern principle that all human beings possess an inner, natural freedom. Hegel tracked this expansion across civilizations. In the ancient Oriental world, only one person, the emperor, was free. In Greece and Rome, some were free. In the modern world, the standard demands freedom for all. What emerges is a picture of history as an unstoppable, self-correcting algorithm. It doesn't mean every era perfectly delivers equality, but it means the internal logic of human development demands an ever-expanding definition of freedom. But a philosophical system this grand and absolute inevitably carries the seeds of its own contradiction. This is a portrait of Karl Marx. He took Hegel's engine of the dialectic, but he completely swapped out the fuel. Where Hegel saw human consciousness and ideas driving the march of history, Marx argued that raw material conditions were doing the actual pulling. Marx looked at who owned the land, who controlled the labor, and who extracted the profit. From that material data, he generated a highly specific prediction. Capitalism would buckle under its own internal contradictions and inevitably give way to communism. Marx took Hegel's abstract direction of history and forged it into an inexorable law of human destiny. It was a concrete, testable hypothesis, and the 20th century would test it in blood. Writing in the aftermath of those 20th century tests is the philosopher Karl Popper. He looked at the wreckage of modern Europe and concluded that the belief in inevitable historical laws was a deadly illusion. Popper started with a strict logical critique. History only happens once. It is a single, unrepeatable process. You cannot derive universal scientific laws from an experiment that can never be run a second time. But his more urgent warning was moral. If you believe you know the final destination of human society, any action that gets you there becomes mathematically justifiable. Popper argued that the idea of inexorable historical destiny provided a very convenient intellectual cover for the horrific atrocities committed by fascist and communist regimes. This is a 19th century abolitionist petition. Popper wasn't arguing that moral progress is fake. The abolition of slavery is undeniable proof of forward momentum, but he insisted that this progress happens because human beings recognize cruelty and decide to stop it, not because an invisible algorithm is running in the background. You do not need a law of history to know that oppression is wrong. Popper dismantles the determinist trap. You must fight evil simply because it is evil, not because a historical pattern tells you it is mathematically destined to lose. While Popper attacked the system on a macro-political scale, another philosopher, Soren Kierkegaard, zoomed in to the extreme micro-level. Kierkegaard observed a glaring flaw in Hegel's project. He noted that a thinker will erect a massive, high-vaulted palace of a system that perfectly explains the whole of world history. But if you look at that thinker's actual life, he doesn't live in the palace. He lives next door in a kennel, or the messy, unglamorous janitor's quarters of everyday human existence. This illustration captures the storming of the Bastille. Hegel's grand architecture can perfectly map out exactly why the French Revolution had to happen. But if you wake up with an illegitimate child, crippling financial debts, or a deep, lingering grief, the dialectic is entirely useless. It cannot tell you whether to forgive someone who wronged you. A theory of everything is ultimately hollow if it has no room for a singular human being making an unrepeatable moral choice. Think about how often we use the phrase, the wrong side of history today. Every time we say it, we are proving that we still desperately crave Hegel's vision. We want the comfort of knowing that societal progress is a locked-in destination, and we want the assurance that our political enemies are naturally destined to fail. But we can apply Hegel's own process of Aufhebung to this very problem. First, we have to cancel the dangerous determinism that Popper warned us about. The future is not guaranteed, and history is not going to do the hard work for us. At the same time, we should preserve Hegel's most brilliant observation. Humanity's collective understanding of what freedom actually means really does deepen, absorb its failures, and correct itself over centuries. And finally, we elevate that understanding to Kierkegaard's harsh truth. You cannot use sweeping historical patterns as an excuse to avoid making your own choices. History does not have sides. It only has individuals, waking up every single day and deciding what they are going to build next. Hegel famously wrote that the owl of Minerva, the symbol of wisdom, spreads its wings only with the falling of the dusk. We can only truly see the pattern of an era as it ends. When the sun sets on one stage of history, the responsibility for what happens at sunrise belongs entirely to us.